Are you ready to live a more meaningful and passionate life? Through the principles of heart living, you'll delve into new theories, discover life wisdom, and achieve greater balance. Become inspired. Tune in to Dr. Cynthia Bischoff, international life coach and practitioner who's helped thousands transform their lives. Part of the Dreamvisions 7 radio network, Heart Living with Dr. Cynthia Bischoff will lead you on a remarkable journey of the heart.
Welcome to the Heart Living with Dr. Cynthia Bischoff show. I'm Dr. Cynthia Bischoff, your host. You can listen to Heart Living on syndicated Dreamvisions 7 radio network every Wednesday at 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Boston and worldwide. You may listen online or on mobile devices. To learn more, go to dreamvisions7radio.com for a full schedule. Dreamvisions 7 radio network is the media partner for Omega Institute. Thanks so much for tuning into our show. Our topic is practicing faith over fear. Now, this is, in my opinion, an extremely important topic. As a life coach, I work with people frequently around their concepts of not only their fears and how to overcome them, move through them, and all of that, but also their level of faith in, this being a world that's supporting them and so forth. And it's actually possible to spend a lifetime living with what I often think is a low-grade fever of fear, especially if you grew up that way. So how then do fear and faith compete with one another? That's a good place to start, I think, on our show. And, maybe it sounds familiar, but sometimes I feel like when individuals come in to see me, they will mention that they had a moment when they knew that something was going to turn out all right. Even though from a rational standpoint, it didn't seem likely or even possible, but somehow they knew everything was going to be okay. But then in turn, I've had the same people say they had moments when, despite how much they reassured themselves or, other people reassured them, that they were full of anxiety and fear about something that was going on, some kind of life challenge. And they were concerned about just even general outcomes in their daily lives. So these types of varied responses are often referred to as what is called the dance of faith and fear. Now, for most of us, our lives have certainly involved this kind of dance. And what's really important to know is that the dance of faith and fear can certainly affect and, even limit our very life quality. And I think that, and I certainly know, even for myself, I grew up in a family where it wasn't so much a fear-based family, but you needed to be safe, you needed to be stable, secure, that type of thing, which of course can induce thoughts of fear if you go outside the boundaries or the lines. And maybe many of you have experienced that. But for most of us, I think our lives have involved, again, this dance. And in some cases, we may choose safe ground, really for real living, for one thing. So safe ground instead of, real living, because perhaps we're too uncertain or just afraid to take a risk. And we can also allow our fears in that way to actually run our lives or direct our lives. So on the show today, what I want to start out with is just discussing how to work through and understand our fears, and most of all, to try to get a handle on where those fears might have originated. And, of course, that's not all, because we also need to explore our relationship to what we've called faith. So, fear is one thing, but we've got to also look at our level of faith and where that and what about that level of faith, and how does it assist us in regarding the idea of working through our fears. So, often your fears may be limiting you or doing what is called filtering your messages. And your fears may also be causing you to fall into certain mind traps that can limit you. So we'll look at practical steps for understanding your motivations, what's motivating you, and how to release your fears, and frankly, just to allow faith to guide you. We'll also talk about some tools that you can use to help you create and strengthen what would really be called a more positive relationship to your own world. So we'll start with fears to understand the basis of them. So, as I talk about this, you may want to be thinking, how does this apply? Or throughout the show, I'm also going to ask questions that will get us all thinking about how to work through our situations. So early on in life, each of us would have had a primary motivation. And for the most part, it's believed that a child's greatest fear, and this is researched, a child's greatest fear is not wanting to be abandoned. And you may not know it, but, again, based on research, that is found to be a child's greatest fear, abandonment itself. So really then, from that perspective, each of us from early on was trying to survive in our world. And we learned through our role models, who for the most part would have been our parents, grandparents, teachers, and other caregivers. So we would have learned, through these role models, the system of authority. We would have received some kind of modeling, some rules about what you could really call how to be in the world. And in part, we would have imitated our caregivers. So, for the most part, most kids try to follow their rules that they're given and then imitate the caregivers. Or in some cases, and it's almost like my experience in coaching is 1 in 5 people will be the rebel. Not everybody's the rebel, but 1 in 5 will challenge those rules and those caregivers. But either way, you have to consider what was your caregiver's relationship to fear, and in turn, what was their relationship to faith. Were you taught or did you believe that the world was out to get you? Because I have absolutely had clients tell me that they were taught that, this is not a friendly place. So the world was out to get you. And this, of course, would conjure up in you a fear-based kind of philosophy, or that people were basically well-intentioned unless they were proven otherwise. That's a more faith-based kind of reality. So that's one way to start. Was your world a friendly or an unfriendly place? And I believe that Einstein says, if you grew up or if you believe your world was a friendly or unfriendly place, it changed everything for you, no doubt. So again, what about your world? And then the second part would be, if we just look at parents as the primary caregivers, were your parents warriors? And if they were or they weren't, did you perceive the world you grew up in? Did you worry about that world you grew up in? Again, friendly, unfriendly place. So some of my clients have told me that they were led to believe also that if they were not worrying, so in other words, worrying became the norm. So if they were not worrying, that they might be shocked or surprised by something negative that could happen. It was almost as though they were saying worrying would keep it from happening rather than, be a waste of their energy. It would be like if you worry enough, you'll keep it from happening. And actually, we know that our thoughts do create our reality. So if you're putting all your energy into worrying, or much of it into worrying, you're actually giving energy to the negative. And even some would say, as far as manifesting, that you're drawing what you're worrying about toward yourself. So the first question really for each of us is, how much do you worry now? And what are your greatest fears? And they don't have to be rational. Most of the time we think, oh, well, that'll never happen. And of course, it probably won't. But that doesn't mean it doesn't worry people. I remember one time having a client who was a tenured professor at a university, and her greatest fear was being homeless or being without. And she grew up in a family where her mother abandoned her at a young age, and she was almost homeless, given her circumstances. So even though she grew up to far exceed anything that probably would have been expected of her, and she was an amazing person, nonetheless, she still carried that fear of what if I'm going to be left? What if I'm going to be alone? What if I can't make it? So your fears don't have to be rational at all. And basically, your fears and your worries may have made your most important decisions in life. There's a saying that they've probably raised your children and even limited some of your own potential and your own possibilities. So from this type of standpoint, we could also say that fear becomes the gatekeeper of your comfort zone. And as a gatekeeper, it determines what you're going to allow in, or, of course, what you won't allow in. And if there's ever a danger of not being accepted or approved, or even for some people not being understood, you might find that your fears can keep you from being yourself. So, they'll keep you from being yourself, standing up for what you believe in, or just even developing your potential fully. So many times people feel the strong need to be approved, accepted, understood, and I always liken it to this concept, they'll cut off a part of themselves to stay present with other people. Now, my true experience in doing that as I've worked with so many people and even in my own life, is that if you do cut off a part of yourself to stay present with someone else, you will eventually have to go back and reclaim that part. So, be cautious about what you're doing to stay present with other people, because, again, you're going to have to find that part at some time. So when you're willing to shift or change your thoughts, which you have to do in order to work through your fears, you can really open yourself up to some real living. And, that's so important for us to look at. So what about the origin of fear? So fear is really closely related to your core self. And, if your core self is more negative in general, for some people it sounds like an inner critic that may have certain kinds of thoughts. And doing this as a workshop in the past, I remember individuals coming up with ideas, their inner core self thoughts would be like, it's me against the world. Or another core thought might be, I just have to be perfect to be acceptable. Or it's not okay to be, who I really am. And another common one is I'm never enough. But all of these are considered to be negative core beliefs. So the origin of your fears may very much be closely related to your upbringing and, the rules and what you were taught. And it can be very helpful to evaluate that. So again, in coaching, I like to ask people to complete statements. And I'll share those with you because on your own, on a separate paper, you can write down some answers to these, and that might be very helpful for you in working through your fears. So one of the questions, or one of the statements, I should say, I ask people to complete would be, my mother, and you could also substitute my father or even do two separate sentences. But let's go with mother first. So my mother expected me to blank. We expected to be something, do something, have something, but my mother expected me. My father expected me to do or be blank. Another one, my teachers believed that I was blank. I remember one client who had tremendous issues, and she was the most creative person, but she had these tremendous low self-esteem issues. And she told me that once, so we talked first of all about her parenting and how, what her parents were like. And she said, they were basically supportive, and she didn't really feel like there was much of a problem there. But then she went on to share that one time in the hall in, I think it was 6th grade, she was standing at her locker, and all the kids were getting in their lockers, and this teacher came along and said, look at you, you're an absolute mess. And she started pulling the stuff out of my client's locker. And she said, you're an absolute mess. Look at you, you're never going to amount to anything. I can't believe what a mess you are. Fix this up, after she, of course, threw it in the floor. Now, that person obviously should never have been a teacher, but the idea is not that. The fact is it happened. And so she read into that, and the kids looked at her and laughed, was, I will, in fact, never amount to anything, and I am a mess. And really, she was an extremely creative person who was far from a mess. And as time went on and we worked through it, we realized that the teacher had actually caused her more harm even than her own parenting. So many different people can do different things. And somebody, as the saying goes, can say something to you that took all of 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, and it can be something that lasts in you forever depending on how you perceive it and how it affected you. So, okay, another one that I have clients complete statements. I expect myself to do or be blank. And another one, I am most afraid of blank. So if you were to complete these statements, what insights would come to you would be really helpful as you would examine your responses. So I'm going to say them quickly again. My mother, or father expected me to blank. My teachers believed that I was blank. I expect myself to do or be blank. I am most afraid of blank. So as an exercise, these statements can help you to figure out the origin of your fears. And then you can evaluate, again, how your fear may be doing the filtering that I mentioned. And, filtering is that act of limiting or tuning out options because they don't align with you being safe. So filtering keeps you from receiving certain messages and certain ideas. And we're really great at building evidence to uphold our fear-based beliefs. So if somebody says to you, here would be an example, somebody could say to you, you're great, and your filter could not even say out loud, but be thinking, well, if you really knew me, you wouldn't say that. because the filter kind of